You know that feeling when you stumble upon something you weren't supposed to find? A chill ran down my spine as I held the dust-covered box in my hands. It was a day like any other, helping Graham clean out her attic when I tripped over it. She had no idea what it was or where it came from. But something about the way the light danced off its tarnished metallic corners, gave me an odd sense of dread. It wasn't particularly large, about the size of a shoebox. Intricate carvings adorned its faded wooden surface, and a strange, ancient symbol was etched onto the top. It was the kind of box that you'd expect to find in a vintage shop, not in your grandmother's attic. The air around it seemed to grow colder, heavier, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, scrutinized by unseen eyes. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, a primal warning sign that something wasn't right. But curiosity, as it often does, got the better of me. I had to know what was inside. With a deep breath, I gently lifted the lid, half expecting something to jump out at me. But instead, what I found was far more unsettling. Inside the box, there was an old diary, the pages yellowed with age. The leather-bound book was worn, and the ink had faded in places, but the handwriting was unmistakable. It was my grandmother's. But what really sent my heart racing was not the diary itself, but its contents. I flipped through the pages, and my blood ran cold. The entries, they were all about me. From the day I was born till the present day, every detail of my life was meticulously recorded in that diary. But how? My grandmother couldn't possibly know all this. Reading those entries, I could feel my heart pound in my chest. It was like a nightmare, but I was wide awake. The pages were filled with words written in a shaky hand. The ink faded, but the stories were as vivid as ever. I found myself drawn into a world of past events, of memories that were mine, yet penned by hands that were not. The first entry I read was about a summer day when I was 7. It described the time I fell off my bike and scraped my knee, the taste of the dirt in my mouth, the sting of the antiseptic as my mother cleaned the wound. It was a memory I hadn't thought of in years, and yet here it was, written down with such detail. It was as if I was reliving it. Another entry spoke of my first heartbreak in high school, the ache that seemed unbearable, the tears that would not stop. I hadn't shared these feelings with anyone, not even my closest friends. Yet, they were written down, word for word, as if the author had been there in my mind, experiencing it with me. The third entry I read was about the time I lost my job, the feeling of failure and despair, the fear of not knowing what would come next. It was a dark time in my life that I'd tried to forget, yet here it was, captured in ink on these old pages. But it was the next entry that made my blood run cold. It was dated for tomorrow. It spoke of an event that hadn't happened yet. The words were cryptic, full of shadows and whispers, but the message was clear. Something was coming, something that filled me with a dread I couldn't shake. The final entry, it was dated tomorrow, and it foretold a chilling event. The words echoed in my head, a haunting premonition of an unknown horror that was yet to come. I tried to dismiss it, to rationalize it, but the entries, they were too detailed, too accurate. I was left grappling with the chilling revelations that unfolded before me, a cold shiver crawling up my spine, gripping the nape of my neck like icy fingers. I tried to shake it off, to make sense of it all, but it was like trying to untangle a web spun by a deranged spider. I found myself pacing the length and breadth of my room, the diary's haunting words echoing in my mind. Each entry, each prediction was a chilling mirror of reality, a macabre dance of past, present, and future. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence, an elaborate prank maybe, but the entry's uncanny accuracy made it hard to dismiss. It was like watching a horror movie that you're a part of, and you know the ending isn't going to be a happy one. I wondered if I was losing my mind. I even tried to laugh it off, but the laughter was hollow, devoid of any real mirth. My attempts to find logical explanations were futile. I was drawn back to the diary, time and again, the words like a siren song pulling me towards the rocks of an impending doom. The entries were too precise, down to the minute details. The way my coffee mug had chipped this morning, the unexpected call from an old friend, the power cut at 8 in the evening. It was all there in the diary, penned down before they had happened. It was as if the diary held a mirror to my life, reflecting it with a frightening accuracy. I couldn't escape the gnawing fear that settled in the pit of my stomach, the dread that was slowly consuming me. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as the realization dawned upon me. The diary wasn't just predicting the small, mundane happenings of my life, it was leading up to something horrifying. The clock struck midnight, and the date now matched the final entry. I was living in the shadow of a predicted horror. As the day unfolded, the predictions in the diary started to come true, one by one. The diary had foretold of a crow landing on my windowsill at 8 in the morning. I laughed it off, thinking it was just a coincidence. But then, it also predicted the phone call from an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. The diary said he'd call at 10 past 11, and when my phone buzzed at that exact moment, my heart jumped. Lunch was a cold sandwich, just as the diary had written. I hadn't planned it that way, but when I opened the fridge, there was nothing else to eat. The diary seemed to know more about my day than I did. The sun glared down from a cloudless sky, right on schedule at 2:30, just as the diary had said. I stood there, squinting at the harsh light, feeling the heat on my skin. The diary was right again. It was then that I felt the first stirrings of fear, a creeping, cold dread that slithered up my spine and wrapped itself around my mind. It was not just a diary anymore. It was a harbinger of doom, a grim foreteller of the horror that was to come. The diary had also predicted a blackout at 5 in the evening. As the lights flickered and died, I was left in the dark, alone with my thoughts and the grim predictions of the diary. The fear was now a living, breathing thing, gnawing at my sanity. As the day wore on, the predictions became more and more specific, each one drawing me deeper into the labyrinth of fear and paranoia. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside, every shadow that crossed my path seemed to be part of the diary's prophecy. The hour was here. I could feel my heart racing, my palms sweating. The world outside seemed to hold its breath, the night air still and lifeless, as if it too was awaiting the predicted horror. The silence was deafening, each tick of the clock echoing through the empty house like a hammer hitting an anvil. The fear was a tangible thing, an icy grip around my heart, squeezing tighter with every passing second. I could barely breathe, my chest tight, my throat dry. The dread was like a weight, pressing me down into the worn-out couch, my eyes glued to the ominous ticking hands of the clock. The house seemed to be in on the secret, its old bones creaking under the strain of the silent weight. The wooden floorboards groaned beneath my feet. The old wallpaper seemed to ripple in the dim light, and the shadows danced like phantoms in the corners of my eyes. I could feel the seconds slipping away, each one bringing me closer to the moment I had been dreading since I found that cursed diary. Every entry had come true. Every horror had unfolded just as it was written in those yellowed pages. My mind was reeling, filled with the horrifying images of the past events, the blood, the screams, the terror. It was all too real, too vivid. I was living through a nightmare, a horror story that was written for me, about me. I was trapped in my own home, a prisoner of my own fear. I felt isolated, cut off from the world, alone with my terror. The anticipation was unbearable. The suspense was killing me. I was at the mercy of the ticking hands of the clock, each tick a step closer to the final predicted event. The silence was shattered by the chime of the clock. The hour was here. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath hitched in my throat. The world outside seemed to hold its breath, the night air still and lifeless, and then there was a knock on the door.